Hello, everybody. This is Pastor Bobby from First United Methodist Church of Borger, Texas, coming to you with Coffee with Bobby. And this is Monday, which means we're going to be doing one of the Psalms today. And I've decided to do Psalm 49 because it's a very interesting psalm. A psalm that I'm guessing if you were to poll 100 people, 1,000 people, maybe even 100,000 people, and you asked them what their favorite psalm was, or you asked them to name their top 10 psalms, or maybe if you asked them to name their top 75 psalms. Now, just for note, there's 150 psalms. So if you were to have them rank their top half of their psalms that they love and hold dear, I doubt you would find Psalm 49 in any of those lists. There might be a few odd people out there that just love Psalm 49 and it's near the top of their list, but the vast majority of people don't. Before we get started, I'm going to have a little sip of my coffee here. Drinking out of my Rio Doso cup that I introduced a couple weeks ago. This is a cup that a former secretary of mine got me when she was visiting Rio Doso, and I know I've said it before, but I've never been to Rio Doso, so one of these days I need to take Cheryl and the kids out there. Alright, but Psalm 49. As I said earlier, it's not a psalm that a lot of people probably know by heart. It's definitely not one of most people's favorites. But I think it's got a great, poignant message, a very important message, and a message that we hear echoed by Jesus time and time again. So let's go ahead and get started with reading it. And again, this is Psalm 49. I'm reading out of the Common English Bible. It's just my preferred one for reading and for study. I use multiple different translations and versions when looking at text. But for something like this and for worship on Sunday mornings and different things, I like to read out of the Common English Bible because I think it's very easy to read. It's a great mixture of direct translation, word-for-word translation, with a good mixture of meaning for meaning translation. Let us hear these words from the psalmist to us, and it says, "For the music leader, a psalm of the Korahites." Korahites, we don't know who those are, the Korahites, however you say that word. But let's hear these words now. May our hearts, our minds, and our ears be open to what God would be revealing to us as we hear these words proclaimed. "Listen to this, all you people, listen closely, all you citizens of the world. People of every kind, rich and poor alike, my mouth speaks wisdom, my heart's meditation is full of insight. I will pay close attention to a proverb, and I will explain my riddle on the lyre." The lyre is a kind of musical instrument, stringed instrument that they played back in the day. "Why should I be afraid in times of trouble when the wrongdoing of my bullies engulfs me? Those people who trust in their fortunes and boast of their fantastic health? Wealth? It can't save a single person. It can't pay a life's ransom price to God. The price to save someone's life is too high. Wealth will never be enough. No one can live forever without experiencing the pit." And the pit, that word is the word for Sheol. And as far as the pit goes, what it's talking about is in ancient Hebrew times, they had this idea that once a person died, the soul went to rest in Sheol, this place. It's not hell. It's not the same concept as hell. But Sheol was a resting place. It was neither good nor bad. It was just a place that was there, where the soul went and was kept until the day of resurrection, until the time that Messiah returns under Jewish thought, and the bodily resurrection took place. That's where it talks about, where it says experiencing the pit. Let me read on. "Everyone knows that the wise die too, just like the foolish and the stupid people do, all of them leaving their fortunes to others. Their graves are eternal homes, the place they live for all generations, even if they had countries named after them. People won't live any longer because of wealth. They're just like the animals that pass away. How it goes for those who are foolish, as well as for those who follow their lead, pleased with their talk. Like sheep, they're headed straight for the grave. Death will be their shepherd, but those who do right in their hearts will rule over them come morning. Their forms wasting away in the grave rather than having some dignified residence. But God will save my life from the power of the grave because he will take me." Don't be overly impressed when someone becomes rich, their house swelling to fantastic proportions, because when they die, they won't take any of it with them. Their fantastic things won't accompany them down under. And again, down under is another reference back to the pit or back to Sheol. Though they consider themselves blessed during their lives and even thank you when you deal well with them. That's God. They think God gave them the blessings, is what the author here is saying. They too will join the ancestors who have gone ahead. They will never see the light again. Wealthy people, they just don't understand. They're just like the animals that pass away. This can be kind of a tough psalm, especially for maybe persons who do have a lot of wealth, because it almost seems at times that the author is looking down upon folks of wealth, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think this is not a warning. This is not to bash folks who are wealthy, but I think it's a heads up. I think it's a heads up to those folks who have been able to amass wealth, a wealth that is beyond what they need to supply for their needs and even some of their wants. And in this country, in the United States, that's a lot of people. And it leads us to a good question of who's wealthy? Who's considered wealthy? And to answer that question, I think you really have to ask yourself and ask the general question of who is it that's asking the question of who is wealthy? If somebody like me were to ask about who's wealthy, I'd never look at myself as wealthy. My wife and I are both professionals. She's a teacher. I'm a pastor. We make a good middle-class paycheck, but by no means wealthy. So for me, somebody with wealth might be somebody who has a 7-digit bank account, and that's not 7 digits with the decimal point. That's 7 digits after the decimal point. So instead of not like 10,000, I have like 1 million. So I'm talking about, or something like that, or even more is what someone in my situation would consider wealthy. But if you go and you talk to somebody who's making minimum wage, and that is what they've made their whole life, they might consider wealthy somebody who makes what my wife and I make. To them, that would be wealthy because it would be quite a substantial raise over what they're used to. But then you go and you ask maybe folks in different third world countries or folks that are in developing economies or beginning to develop economies, and they're going to look and say, man, anybody who has a roof over their head, anybody who has a car, much less 2 cars in their family, anyone who can actually go out to eat on a fairly regular basis, anybody who can afford to spend a little extra money on coffee. I buy the Keurig pods most of the time, and those are a lot more expensive than just regular coffee. And then I buy coffee from different places, different kind of gourmet coffees. So for someone who is in a developing country, someone who is part of falls under a despotic sort of regime, where the people are kept poor so the very high up can live high on the hog, would see the kind of expenses that I make as expenses of the wealthy, and they would consider me wealthy. So we have to look at who's asking the question and who is doing that. And I think the reality is here in the United States, most of us would be considered wealthy by the vast majority of the world. That's just a reality. We don't consider ourselves wealthy, but in the grand scheme, we would. So, with that said, how do you like this psalm? How do you like its words to the wealthy, the words of what I would call warning or words of heads up? Well, this psalm, too, it's also a psalm of wisdom. It's a song of instruction. At points of the psalm, it brings in parts of comfort when it says, though I have faced these things from certain people, God is still with me. God will be with me. God will bless me. Not financially. That's definitely not what it's talking about here. We're talking about blessing, but God will bless me with His presence when I'm in the midst of facing whatever persecution, oppression, or whatever may happen. But so mostly it's a psalm of instruction, and that's a psalm of wisdom. And that takes us back to Psalm 1. If we remember Psalm 1 is the lens through which we read the rest of the 149 Psalms. And Psalm 1 talked about the ways to live under God's wisdom, or ways to live under foolishness or folly, a way to be wise and a way to be a fool. And this psalm talks about being wise and a fool quite a bit. And remember what it means to walk in the ways of wisdom, or God's wisdom, is to follow God's instructions, to live as God desires us to live, to follow under the life of the fool or the foolish is to act selfishly or act within greed and to gather up what I can to keep it hoarded within my own little circle. And this psalm is definitely a psalm of instruction saying, live the wise way. Don't live like the fools do, who accumulate more wealth than they could possibly ever need, and then trust in it. Trust in the wealth before they trust in God. One thing I need to make very clear is what this psalm is not denigrating people who are wealthy. This psalm is not saying people who are wealthy are sinners. It's not saying people who have accumulated great wealth are inherently evil or inherently against the will of God. What it's doing is giving a warning to those who have accumulated great wealth to still act within wisdom, to still act in the ways that God desires us to live. Don't trust in that wealth that you've accumulated, is what it's saying. Because at the end of the day, there's a great equalizer. There's a great equalizer between the poor and the rich and everybody in between, and that's death. Death equalizes us all. Sure, wealth can make things a little bit easier for us in some ways while we're alive. If you're wealthy, you typically don't have to worry about where your next meal's coming from. You don't have to worry about having a roof over your head or your basic needs being met. But at the end of the day, and to put it here in terms of the United States, the 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,800 square foot house is just as good for you as the 6, 7, 8,000 square foot beautiful mansion. And that's, I think, what this psalm is trying to get at. That to live in a way that is wise is to trust in God and to use the resources that He's given you in a godly manner. And it becomes a foolish endeavor to accumulate more wealth if we're doing it for the sake of placing our trust in it. Or what sometimes happens is people start out with the best of intentions. They gain wealth with a desire to be able to give back. But then something switches in the brain. Something happens. As they accumulate more wealth, they begin to accumulate more power. They begin to run in circles they haven't ran in before. They begin to have more influence than they've ever had before. And all of a sudden, the reason they acquired wealth in the beginning is no longer the reason they're acquiring it now. So the admonition to all of us that the psalmist wants us to hear is to trust in God. To trust in God. Well, as I said earlier, it's probably not on most people's favorite list of psalms. I think that's a shame because I think it's a great word of advice for us here in the United States and for us in the Western world. And also I think it helps us remember just how fortunate we are to have a God that loves us and a God that isn't going to base who He loves, who He accepts in, who He allows to come into His presence based upon what we've accumulated here on earth. It talks of a God of love that in the end equalizes us all. Well, I hope you enjoyed this psalm, Psalm 49. I hope that for some of you it got a little bit higher on your favorites list. Or maybe some of you are just hearing about it for the first time and will make it one of your favorites because it really does have a lot to say to us today. Well, God bless you all. We will meet again on Wednesday morning for one of the parables that I'm debating. I've been kind of peer pressured by one of my church members to look at the the parable of the dishonest manager. For those that don't know, that's in Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. Give it a shot. I don't know that I'll do it this week, but I'll probably do it the next week and talk about it. This week I have 2 or 3 different parables I'm looking at. I'm going to surprise you. God bless you all. Hope you all have a wonderful couple days till we see each other again.